The night enveloped the small house in darkness, broken only by the soft glow of the lamp in the living room. Shadows crept into every corner, distorting the familiar landscape of furniture and family photographs into something foreign. It was a quiet evening, the kind that often drifts into a peaceful lull, but a sense of unease began to linger in the back of my mind, whispering reminders that darkness can hold secrets. As I settled onto the couch with a book, the comforting hum of the world outside faded into silence. The wind whispered against the window panes, a ghostly sigh that sent a shiver down my spine. I shrugged it off, immersing myself in the story, but my concentration was sporadic, each turn of the page interrupted by a sense of being watched. After a while, I glanced up, instinctively drawn to the window. The curtain fluttered slightly, as if stirred by a breath from beyond. I pushed aside the fabric and peered into the night, scanning the empty street lit by the pale glow of the street lamps. Nothing moved, just the stillness of a neighborhood settling into sleep. I returned to my book, but the feeling of being observed intensified, prickling at my neck. With each passing moment, the tension built, a nagging urge to look again. I set the book aside and stood, crossing the room to the window once more. I drew back the curtain, peering into the darkness. The street remained empty, but as I turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the yard, partially obscured by the tall hedges that lined the property. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted into the gloom. The stranger was dressed in dark clothing, their features indistinguishable in the shadows, yet there was a heaviness in their presence that sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I stepped back, heart racing. The world outside felt charged, each shadow a potential threat. I pulled the curtain closed, hoping to dismiss the figure as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But as I returned to the couch, the unsettling sensation of being watched clung to me like a damp fog. Minutes dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence. I tried to shake the feeling, but I could not ignore the unsettling thought that the stranger was still out there, waiting. My instincts urged me to take action. I glanced at my phone, but the battery was dead, leaving me isolated in the encroaching darkness. I returned to the window, heart pounding with trepidation. As I pulled the curtain back once more, my breath hitched in my throat. The figure was closer now, standing in the center of my yard, bathed in the dim light of the nearest street lamp. They stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from shadows, their face hidden beneath a hood. A cold shiver danced down my spine, and I fought the impulse to retreat. Instead, I leaned forward, curiosity mingling with dread. What were they waiting for? Why hadn't they moved? My mind raced through possibilities. Was this an intruder? A lost soul looking for help? As I studied the figure, a sense of foreboding began to wrap around me. The shadows seemed to twist and curl around them, creating an almost tangible darkness that swallowed the light. I blinked, trying to discern any details, but the longer I stared, the more they appeared to meld with the night. With a sudden surge of courage, I flicked on the porch light, illuminating the yard with a bright glow. But the figure did not flinch. They remained there, as if the light was an irrelevance in their world. I felt the breath hitch in my throat, a sense of urgency rising within me. Suddenly the stranger turned their head slightly, and in that instant, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of something, eyes glinting in the darkness, a sharpness that sent terror coursing through me. It was as if they could sense my gaze, drawing the weight of their presence to bear on me. The house felt smaller, the walls closing in as I stepped back from the window, anxiety pooling in my stomach. My instincts screamed at me to flee, to hide, to call for help, but the chill of fear anchored me to the spot. I glanced around the room, searching for something, anything, to reassure me that I was safe. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Perhaps if I just ignored them, they would go away. I turned away from the window, but the feeling of dread lingered like a dark cloud. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to swell, thickening as if responding to the threat outside. Moments passed, each tick of the clock growing louder, more insistent. I returned to the window once more, peering through the curtain, praying the figure would be gone. But the yard remained empty, devoid of life, as if the stranger had never been there at all. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Just as I began to breathe again, I noticed something odd, a small object on the porch where the figure had stood. It was dark, glinting in the light, and I felt an irrational pull to investigate. What had they left behind? Against my better judgment, I opened the door, the hinges creaking in protest as I stepped outside. The cold night air struck me like a slap, jolting me awake. I approached the porch, eyes fixated on the object, an unshakable sense of trepidation lingering in the back of my mind. As I neared, I could see it more clearly. A small, intricately carved wooden box, its surface etched with swirling designs that glinted in the light. I crouched down, reaching out with trembling fingers, but just as I touched it, a gust of wind swept through the yard, chilling me to the bone. My heart raced as I pulled my hand back, scanning the area for any sign of the figure. They were nowhere to be seen, but the weight of their presence still hung in the air, a silent reminder of the encounter. I stared at the box, feeling drawn to it, yet the unease crept back, urging me to retreat. I picked up the box, its weight solid and reassuring in my hands. I turned it over, feeling the cool wood against my skin. There was no latch or opening, just a smooth surface that seemed to pulse with energy. As I examined it further, I felt a chill run down my spine, a shiver that suggested the object was imbued with something beyond mere craftsmanship. The whispers of the wind swirled around me, and I felt a pressure build within the night, an expectation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I took a step back, holding the box tightly against my chest. With every heartbeat, the memories of the figure returned, their presence lingering just out of sight. The house loomed behind me, a familiar comfort that now seemed distant, overshadowed by the unknown. I turned to go inside, glancing over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see the stranger standing in the shadows watching me with their unblinking gaze. But the yard was empty, the darkness swallowing any trace of the figure. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the sound echoing in the silence. I leaned against it, heart racing, the box still clutched tightly in my hands. As I turned to the living room, the shadows flickered along the walls, and I sensed the weight of the night closing in. The whispers returned, mingling with the rustling of leaves outside, weaving together a story that would not be forgotten. In that moment, I knew that the encounter with the stranger was just the beginning. With the box resting on the table, I stood frozen, heart pounding, aware that I had been drawn into a web of mystery that would forever alter the familiar rhythm of my life. The darkness outside whispered secrets, and I was left to wonder what else awaited in the shadows beyond the window. The old house stood at the end of a winding road, its weathered facade a testament to the passage of time. Ivy crept along the brickwork, entwining itself in the broken windows like skeletal fingers grasping for something lost. It had been abandoned for years, whispers in the small town hinting at its dark history, but curiosity tugged at me like a forgotten memory. I pushed the creaking gate open and stepped onto the property, my heart racing with anticipation. As I approached the front door, the hinges protested with a drawn-out groan. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me, but the thrill of discovery urged me forward. The dim light from the overcast sky filtered through the dusty windows, casting a soft glow over the debris-strewn floor. Dust motes danced in the light as I stepped inside, my footfall echoing in the empty halls. The air was stale, carrying the scent of mildew and decay. Each room I entered revealed remnants of a life once vibrant, a cracked mirror, a rusted clock frozen in time, and peeling wallpaper that whispered stories of days long gone. I wandered through the rooms, tracing my fingers along the surfaces, absorbing the history that lingered in the corners. As I moved deeper into the house, I stumbled upon a small nursery at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The door hung slightly ajar, revealing a space that had been untouched for years. A faded rocking chair stood in the corner, and as I pushed the door open, my breath caught in my throat. In the center of the room, half hidden beneath a layer of dust, sat a doll, a porcelain figure dressed in a tattered lace gown, its once bright blue eyes now dulled and clouded. The doll's presence was magnetic, drawing me closer despite a warning flicker of instinct deep within. I knelt beside it, brushing away the dust to reveal its delicate features. A cascade of golden hair framed its porcelain face, and its painted lips curved into a subtle smile. For a moment, I lost myself in its gaze, feeling as if it was looking back at me with an uncanny awareness. I hesitated, my heart racing as an unsettling sensation crept up my spine. The doll felt too real, as if it held memories of its own, memories that had been buried along with the house. I glanced around the room, the remnants of childhood now faded and worn. Toys lay strewn across the floor, forgotten relics of a time that felt achingly close yet impossibly distant. Driven by a strange compulsion, I picked up the doll, its weight surprising in my hands. The fabric of its gown crinkled softly, and I marveled at the intricate stitching. As I turned it over, I noticed a small tag sewn into the hem. A name, Charlotte, delicately embroidered in faded thread. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, conjuring visions of laughter and joy that seemed to echo within these walls. But beneath that nostalgia lingered an unsettling thought. Why had this doll been left behind? What had happened to the child who once held it close? My thoughts began to spiral, each question leading me deeper into a maze of uncertainty. The house seemed to exhale around me, its history wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, a loud crash from the back of the house jolted me from my reverie. The noise echoed through the empty rooms, reverberating in my chest. Instinctively, I clutched the doll tighter, my heart racing. I glanced toward the doorway where shadows flickered ominously, and I felt a rush of adrenaline course through me. The urge to flee surged, yet curiosity held me in place. With trembling hands, I set the doll back down, its glassy eyes seemingly fixated on me as I backed away. I moved to the door, but my gaze was drawn back to the nursery, and for a moment, I felt as if I could hear whispers coming from the doll, soft and unintelligible, mingling with the creaks of the old house. The urge to investigate pulled at me, and I took a step back into the room, glancing around for the source of the noise. The shadows danced in the corners, teasing my imagination, and I felt as if I were being drawn into the depths of a forgotten story. Just as I turned to head toward the sound, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I froze, heart pounding as I turned my head slowly. There, in the dim light, a shadow seemed to shift, darting just beyond the edge of my vision. A chill ran down my spine as I searched the corners of the room, half expecting to see something lurking in the dark. But all I found was stillness, the quiet stretching between the walls. Steeling myself, I took a step toward the noise, the floorboards creaking underfoot, each sound amplifying the silence around me. As I moved deeper into the house, the shadows grew longer, merging into dark shapes that appeared to flicker and twist. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could hear the sound of my own breath, quickening with every step. The crash had come from the kitchen, and as I reached the doorway, I hesitated. The threshold seemed to shimmer with a strange energy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I peered inside, my heart racing, and the sight that greeted me made my stomach churn. Pans lay strewn across the floor, their metallic surfaces reflecting the dim light in chaotic patterns. The window above the sink had shattered, shards of glass glistening like jagged teeth scattered across the floor. Yet, despite the chaos, there was no sign of what had caused the disturbance. It was as if the room itself had erupted in anger, but there was no presence to explain it. Just as I began to step inside, I heard it again, the soft whispering, more distinct now, echoing through the air. It beckoned me, pulling me toward the nursery once more, the forgotten doll waiting for me. The sense of urgency quickened my pace as I retraced my steps, the shadows flickering at the edges of my vision. When I entered the nursery again, the atmosphere felt charged, an energy swirling around the doll as if it were alive. I picked it up once more, the porcelain cold against my skin, and stared into its eyes, searching for answers. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices intertwining, and for an instant, I felt a rush of emotions wash over me. Joy, sorrow, longing. As I stood there, time seemed to slip away. The nursery transformed in my mind, the faded walls coming alive with laughter and play, the echoes of a child's joy filling the air. But with that joy came a sense of tragedy, a deep sadness that threaded through the memories. It was a reminder that the laughter had faded long ago, leaving only remnants of what had once been. The temperature in the room shifted, and I felt a presence surrounding me, an inexplicable force drawing me closer to the doll. The whispers crescendoed, and I sensed the weight of countless stories woven into the fabric of the room. My heart raced as the doll's eyes seemed to glisten, a spark of life dancing within their depths. In that moment I understood. Charlotte was not merely a doll, but a vessel of memories, holding on to fragments of a life long gone. It was a connection to a world that had faded, a reminder of the past that refused to be forgotten. But I was not alone in this space. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, whispers echoing in the corners, and I realized I was standing at the crossroads of two worlds. As I gripped the doll tighter, I felt the warmth of a presence envelop me, wrapping around me like a protective shroud. With a sudden surge of clarity, I set the doll back down in its place, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. It belonged here, in this forgotten nursery, amidst the echoes of laughter and memories. I took a step back, allowing the shadows to recede, the whispers softening into silence. As I turned to leave, the house seemed to sigh, a release of tension that had built over the years. The nursery faded into the background, a part of me now woven into its story. I stepped back into the hallway, feeling the warmth of the sun filtering through the broken windows as I made my way to the exit. With each step, I felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of the past. The doll remained behind, a guardian of memories and secrets, a reminder that some things are meant to stay forgotten. As I closed the door behind me, the house stood still, the shadows settling back into their corners, the whispers fading into the wind. I walked away from the old house, glancing back once more at its weathered facade. It stood as a sentinel of forgotten stories, a place where time held its breath. And though I had left it behind, I knew I would carry a piece of its history with me, a connection to the past that would linger long after I had gone. The evening sky was a deep indigo, the last remnants of sunlight fading into darkness as I arrived at the desolate train station. It was an isolated place, illuminated only by flickering street lamps that struggled to pierce the shadows. I had just missed the last scheduled train by minutes, and my heart sank at the thought of waiting in solitude for the next one, which was hours away. As I stood on the platform, I scanned the empty tracks, an uneasy sensation creeping over me. A chill wind whispered through the station, rustling the fallen leaves that had gathered in the corners. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, trying to ignore the gnawing sensation of being alone in such a desolate place. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as I paced back and forth, my footsteps echoing on the cold concrete. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional distant sound of a car passing on the road, leaving me with the sensation that I was the last person on Earth. I pulled out my phone, but the screen glowed a dull red. My battery had died, leaving me without even the comfort of music or a light. I leaned against a metal pillar, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the tracks stretched into darkness. My thoughts wandered, drifting between mundane concerns and the creeping anxiety of the unknown. I wondered if I should try to find a way to call for a ride, but my instincts pushed me to wait, hoping the train would appear and whisk me away from this unsettling isolation. Suddenly, a distant sound pierced the silence. I straightened, ears straining to catch it again. It was a low rumble, gradually growing louder as if something was approaching from far away. My heart quickened. The familiar sound of a train was both a relief and a source of fresh apprehension. I squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing on the tracks yet. As the sound continued to swell, a heavy mist rolled in, curling around the platform like ghostly fingers. The fog swallowed the station, casting an eerie veil over everything. The lights flickered again, their glow dimming to a ghostly hue, and I felt as if I had stepped into a dream, one that wasn't entirely welcoming. With each heartbeat, the rumble intensified, and I caught a glimpse of headlights piercing through the fog. The train appeared, an enormous shadow gliding silently along the tracks, its body reflecting the dim light like a specter rising from the depths. It came to a halt before me, the doors sliding open with an almost soundless grace. I hesitated, the open doorway beckoning like a gaping maw. I glanced around the platform. It was still deserted, a stark reminder of my solitude. The sensation of being watched crept back into my mind, but there was nowhere else to go. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the train, the metallic scent of the interior mingling with the musty air. The doors closed behind me with a gentle hiss, sealing me inside. I walked down the aisle, the dim lights flickering overhead. The train car was empty, save for a few scattered seats and an unsettling silence that enveloped me. I settled into a window seat, the glass slightly fogged, offering a distorted view of the world outside. The mist continued to swirl around the train, swallowing everything in its embrace. As the train lurched forward, I felt a strange sense of displacement. It wasn't the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks I was accustomed to, but rather a heavy, disconcerting glide, as if the train was gliding over the earth instead of rolling along metal rails. My heart raced as I peered outside, watching the landscape flash by in a blur, the shadows of trees and structures morphing into indistinct shapes. Moments later, the lights flickered and dimmed, plunging the car into semi-darkness. I could barely make out the silhouettes of the seats around me, and I squinted, trying to adjust my eyes to the gloom. As I looked around, I sensed a shift, a presence in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this train. A lingering unease settled in my gut, urging me to stand and leave, but I remained seated, caught in a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. The train continued on, the landscape outside growing more distorted. The trees appeared twisted, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the sky. Shadows danced along the windows, and I turned to the aisle, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the space remained empty. The train rattled, and then, with a sudden jolt, it began to slow down. My heart raced again as I prepared for the stop. The dim lights flickered once more, and through the fogged window I caught sight of a station looming ahead. The platform was shrouded in mist, the sign barely visible through the swirling vapor. As the train came to a halt, the doors slid open once more. The darkness outside seemed to breathe, inviting me to step into its depths. I felt an instinctual urge to flee, but curiosity held me in place as if I were tethered to my seat. After a moment's hesitation, I rose and moved toward the doors. Just as I reached for the handle, a shadow darted past the window, quick and elusive. I froze, staring into the fog outside, heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking out there, hidden in the mist. I hesitated before stepping onto the platform, an urge to retreat battling with the desire to explore. The mist curled around my legs as I stepped down, enveloping me in its embrace. The station was empty, eerily quiet, but the faint echo of laughter wafted through the air, teasing my ears. The sound was so distant, like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. As I looked around, the station was a ghost of its former self, fading paint peeling from the walls and rust creeping over the metal benches. I felt as though I had entered a place suspended in time, a world disconnected from reality. The distant laughter grew louder, a melody weaving through the mist, drawing me deeper into the shadows. With every step, the feeling of being watched returned, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. I glanced over my shoulder, but the train remained still, its doors closed and dark. I turned back to the station, and the laughter morphed into whispers that wrapped around me like tendrils, beckoning me to venture further into the unknown. A flicker of movement caught my eye in the distance, figures emerging from the fog, their features indistinct but their presence unmistakable. They were gathered in a cluster, moving with an otherworldly grace as if they were a part of the mist itself. I felt a mixture of fear and intrigue, my heart racing as I watched. In that moment, I realized that the last train home had taken me somewhere I had not intended to go. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, and the figures began to draw closer, their intentions obscured by the fog. I could feel their gaze, a weight that pressed against my chest, urging me to step further into the depths of the unknown. With a surge of instinct, I turned and fled back to the train, heart pounding as I sprinted through the mist. I reached the doors just as they began to close, the cold metal biting into my skin as I squeezed through. I fell into my seat, gasping for breath, the shadows of the figures still lurking outside the window. As the doors slid shut, sealing me within, the train began to move again, leaving the platform behind. The landscape outside flickered back to life, the trees and structures morphing into something familiar, yet unsettling. The whispers faded, leaving only the soft hum of the train and the rhythmic clattering of wheels on tracks. As I looked out the window, I saw the lights of the town in the distance, illuminating the path ahead. But deep inside, a question lingered. What had I just escaped? The laughter and whispers remained etched in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that could so easily entwine with the ordinary. When I finally arrived at my station, I stepped off the train, the cool night air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. The familiar surroundings of the town welcomed me back, but I couldn't shake the lingering sense of displacement, the knowledge that I had ventured into something far beyond my understanding. The last train home had delivered me safely, but the shadows would continue to whisper, haunting the edges of my thoughts. a reminder of the journey I'd taken into the depths of the unknown. It was a small, unassuming hospital tucked away on the outskirts of town, its facade illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights of the parking lot. I had taken the night shift at Riverside General, my first solo shift after a month of orientation. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving behind a silence that seemed to echo down the dimly lit hallways. The soft hum of machines and the occasional rustle of paper were the only sounds punctuating the stillness. As I walked through the sterile halls, the overhead lights cast sharp shadows, creating an unsettling atmosphere that gnawed at the edges of my mind. The clock on the wall ticked rhythmically, each second drawing me deeper into the night's solitude. My responsibilities were straightforward: check on the patients, monitor their vitals, and ensure that everything was in order. Yet, with each passing hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first patient I visited was in room 204, a frail, elderly woman recovering from surgery. I entered, checking her IV and adjusting the blanket covering her thin frame. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a comfort in the silence, a reminder of life persisting against the backdrop of the night. I noted the warmth of her skin, the way her chest rose and fell in a gentle rhythm. Leaving her room, I made my way to the nurse's station. I glanced at the computer, scanning for any alerts or updates. The glow of the screen illuminated the desk, but my gaze drifted to the hallway beyond, stretching into darkness. The feeling of being observed returned, an uncomfortable sensation that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I shook it off, attributing it to fatigue and the quiet of the night. I moved to check on the next patient, a young man in room 207, recovering from a severe accident. As I approached, I noticed the door slightly ajar, the dim light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open, but something caught my eye. The window was wide open, fluttering the sheer curtains like ghostly fingers beckoning me inside. I stepped in cautiously, my heart pounding as I scanned the room. The patient lay still, his face a mask of discomfort. I adjusted the blanket, ensuring he was warm, then checked the IV drip. The rhythmic sound of the machinery a brief comfort amidst the growing tension. As I turned to leave, the door creaked slightly, and I paused, glancing back toward the dimness of the hallway. A chill settled in my bones, and I dismissed it as an effect of the cool night air seeping through the open window. I moved on to the next room, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. Room 210 housed an elderly man with dementia, his mind a fractured mirror of memories. I entered quietly, taking in the pictures on the bedside table, faded snapshots of family and friends long past. As I checked his vitals, I felt it again, a prickling sensation at the nape of my neck as if someone stood just outside the doorway. I turned to look, half expecting to see a fellow staff member or perhaps a wandering visitor. But the hallway lay empty, swallowed by shadows. I shook my head, dismissing my unease as a figment of my imagination. The night wore on, the clock ticking forward with each moment. I made my rounds, checking on patients, but the sense of discomfort deepened. Each room I entered seemed colder than the last, and whispers of sound echoed softly, yet just beyond comprehension. I reached room 212, where a young girl slept fitfully, a blanket pulled tightly around her. I adjusted the covers, and a sudden sound echoed through the hallway, a soft thud followed by a rustle. I paused, listening intently, my heart racing. The sound came from the end of the corridor, faint but distinct. I took a cautious step toward it, peering into the darkness. The emergency exit door stood ajar, swinging gently as though someone had just passed through. An unsettling sense of foreboding gripped me, and I hesitated, caught between curiosity and instinct. With a deep breath, I approached the door, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The hallway beyond stretched into obscurity, shadows pooling in the corners. I stepped through the doorway, the cool air washing over me, contrasting sharply with the warmth of the hospital. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness, each sound amplified, as if the building itself was listening. The stairwell descended into darkness, the concrete walls damp and unwelcoming. I hesitated, glancing back at the warm light of the hospital. A sense of urgency pulled me forward, and I stepped down the stairs, the echo of my footfalls resonating in the stillness. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of the building pressed down around me. Reaching the bottom, I found myself in a dimly lit basement. Rows of old storage cabinets lined the walls, and a sense of neglect lingered in the air. I peered into the shadows, straining to catch any movement, but the stillness was deafening. Then I heard it again, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against something. My heart raced, adrenaline surging through me as I stepped further into the room. I turned a corner, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and caught a glimpse of something, a shadow darting behind one of the cabinets. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, uncertainty gripping me. My mind raced, attempting to rationalize what I had seen, but logic failed me in that moment. The feeling of being observed returned with a vengeance, a creeping awareness that sent chills down my spine. I backed away slowly, not daring to take my eyes off the cabinet. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. The hair on my arms stood on end as I felt the oppressive weight of the darkness close in around me. I turned to leave, urgency propelling me back toward the stairs. My footsteps quickened, the sound echoing around me as I ascended, desperate to escape the suffocating shadows. As I emerged into the corridor, the warm light of the hospital flooded over me, a welcome relief from the darkness below. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart, the weight of the experience settling heavily in my chest. My mind buzzed with confusion and fear, and I was aware of every sound around me, the distant beeping of machines, the quiet whispers of patients, the soft shuffle of nurses attending to their duties. I continued my rounds, but the events of the night lingered like an unshakable shadow. Each patient room felt like a trap, the familiar walls now closing in on me. I caught sight of the clock. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, the minutes feeling like hours. I tried to focus on my responsibilities, but the memory of the shadow in the basement haunted me, replaying in my mind with every step. Eventually, dawn broke, light streaming through the windows as the first rays of sun chased away the darkness. The hospital began to stir with the sounds of mourning, nurses changing shifts, patients waking from their slumber. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, the chill of the night fading with the warmth of the day. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night had changed me somehow. The quiet whispers of the night shift lingered in my mind, a reminder of the unseen presence that lurked in the shadows. I resolved to never let my curiosity lead me into the depths again, yet I knew that the mystery of the tunnels and the shadows beneath would forever remain a part of my experience at Riverside General. As I walked away, I glanced back at the hospital, the familiar facade now cloaked in a veil of secrets and whispers. The night shift had taught me that sometimes the things we cannot see can leave the most profound impressions lingering long after the shadows have receded. The town was built on a network of ancient tunnels, remnants of a forgotten era that stretched deep beneath the surface. Rumors swirled about the labyrinthine passages, stories of hidden chambers, ghostly whispers, and secrets long buried. Most townsfolk avoided the entrance, an old, rusted grate half hidden behind overgrown weeds in a corner of the abandoned park. But for me, the curiosity was insatiable, a call to adventure that tugged at my soul. On a cool autumn afternoon, I decided to explore the tunnels. I made my way to the park, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet echoing in the stillness. The sky above was painted in shades of gray, and a distant rumble of thunder hinted at the approaching storm. With my heart racing in anticipation, I crouched before the grate, prying it open with a crowbar I had brought along. The metal protested, screeching against the rust, but soon enough I pried it loose and heaved it aside. The dark opening yawned before me, an inviting abyss that promised both thrill and trepidation. I turned on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating the damp stone walls that were slick with moisture. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of soil and decay. As I descended into the tunnels, the world above faded, replaced by the sound of my footsteps echoing against the stone. The tunnels were narrow, the walls closing in on me as I walked further into the depths. The soft drip of water echoed, a constant reminder of the moisture that clung to the stones. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer thrill of exploring a place so few had ventured. Each turn revealed more winding paths, each one darker and more mysterious than the last. As I ventured deeper, the beams of my flashlight flickered, causing shadows to dance along the walls. I paused, checking the batteries, assuring myself that they were still functional. A sense of urgency began to build, a desire to uncover what lay hidden in the shadows. I pressed on, feeling the coolness of the tunnel seep into my bones, invigorating and unsettling all at once. The deeper I went, the more the atmosphere shifted. The stone walls were etched with strange markings, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. They spiraled and intertwined, creating patterns that drew me in. I traced my fingers along the rough surface, curiosity mingling with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The flickering shadows grew more erratic, twisting and curling as if alive. I continued through the winding passages, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Time lost meaning as I navigated the darkened corridors, and I became acutely aware of the stillness that surrounded me. I reached a larger chamber, the ceiling rising high above, adorned with stalactites that hung like teeth from the stone. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing more symbols, now accompanied by faint drawings of figures that seemed to tell a story, one of rituals and offerings. A low rumble reverberated through the chamber, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. My heart raced, and instinct urged me to turn back, but a force deeper within compelled me to stay. I moved further into the chamber, captivated by the drawings. They depicted scenes of a community gathered in reverence, their faces obscured but their postures conveying both fear and reverence. The energy in the chamber shifted again, and I felt a pressure enveloping me, urging me to understand. In the center of the chamber, a large stone altar emerged from the shadows. It was worn and cracked, and an inexplicable pull drew me closer. The air hummed with an intensity that thrummed in my veins, a resonance that seemed to awaken something ancient. I hesitated, the weight of the moment hanging over me, but curiosity propelled me forward. As I approached the altar, a cold gust swept through the chamber, extinguishing my flashlight. Darkness engulfed me, an impenetrable void where sound seemed to disappear. Panic surged within, and I fumbled for my flashlight, desperately trying to turn it back on. With trembling hands, I clicked the button, but the beam remained unresponsive. In the darkness, I could hear the sound of my own breathing, quickening with every passing moment. I turned slowly, attempting to regain my bearings, but the silence around me was unnerving. Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. Shapes emerged from the shadows, not fully formed, but their presence unmistakable. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of the figures, but they dissolved into the darkness just as quickly as they appeared. A chilling realization washed over me. This place was not merely abandoned. It was alive, pulsing with an energy that thrummed beneath the surface. I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, observing from the dark recesses of the chamber. Fear gripped me, and I turned to flee, stumbling back toward the narrow passage I had entered. The tunnel stretched out before me, but the once familiar path now felt distorted, shifting as I ran. Shadows swirled around me, clawing at my clothes and whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. The air grew heavier, each breath a struggle as I pushed through the darkness, desperately searching for the way out. As I navigated the winding passages, the flickering shapes returned, darting just beyond my vision, taunting me with their presence. I sprinted through the tunnel, my heart racing as I chased the faint glimmer of light that signaled the entrance. But the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, the passages twisting in ways that defied logic. Finally, I emerged from the tunnel, gasping for air as I stumbled back into the park. The sunlight was a harsh contrast to the shadows I had just escaped, illuminating the world in a way that felt foreign. I collapsed onto the grass, the weight of my experience crashing down like a tidal wave. The sound of my heartbeat throbbed in my ears, drowning out the distant chirping of birds. In the days that followed, I tried to forget the experience, but the memory lingered like a specter. I found myself drawn back to the park, staring at the rusted grate, wondering what lay beneath the surface. The townsfolk continued to share stories of the tunnels, their voices tinged with awe and fear. I had tasted the darkness, and it had left an indelible mark on my soul. Over time, the dreams began, visions of the chamber, the altar, and the shadowy figures that danced just beyond the reach of my understanding. I awoke in cold sweats, the echoes of whispers clinging to the edges of my consciousness. I found myself questioning reality, unsure of where the dream ended and the memory began. Months later, I returned to the tunnels, a compulsion drawing me back. Armed with fresh batteries and a sense of trepidation, I descended once more into the depths. The darkness enveloped me, but this time I was not afraid. I had come to seek understanding, to confront the shadows that had haunted me. The passageways welcomed me back, and I moved with purpose, retracing my steps to the chamber. The symbols still pulsed with energy, and as I entered, I was greeted by the stillness that had enveloped me before. I could feel the weight of the chamber, the energy swirling around me, beckoning me closer to the altar. This time I approached with reverence, acknowledging the connection I had formed. I reached out, fingertips brushing against the cold stone. The moment I made contact, a surge of energy coursed through me, illuminating my mind with visions, glimpses of the past, the rituals that had taken place in this sacred space. In that moment, I understood. The shadows were not adversaries. They were guardians of the stories long forgotten, protectors of the history that lay buried beneath the surface. I stood in the chamber, no longer a trespasser, but a participant in the narrative woven through time. As the energy enveloped me, I felt a profound sense of belonging. The whispers turned into a symphony of voices, sharing the secrets of the past and weaving them into the fabric of my being. I was part of something greater, a thread in the tapestry of existence that stretched beyond the limits of understanding. When I finally emerged from the tunnels, the sun had set, casting the world in shades of twilight. I carried with me the weight of knowledge, an awareness of the shadows that lurked not only beneath us but within us. The tunnels beneath the town were alive with stories, and I was now a keeper of those tales, bound forever to the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. Late autumn had settled over the town, and the days grew shorter, casting long shadows across the streets. I often took evening walks to clear my mind, reveling in the crispness of the season. The fading light painted the horizon in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to the sound of crunching leaves beneath my feet. On one particularly chilly evening, I decided to stroll through the nearby park. It was a place I had visited countless times, filled with familiar paths, towering trees, and tranquil ponds. Yet as I entered, a peculiar stillness enveloped the area, unlike anything I had experienced before. The usual sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves seemed muted, as if nature itself had drawn a breath and held it. I walked deeper into the park, my breath visible in the cold air. The sun dipped lower and shadows stretched longer across the ground. I noticed the trees leaning in closer, their branches entwined like fingers, creating a canopy that obscured the last rays of light. An uncomfortable sensation crept over me, urging me to turn back, but I pressed on, convinced that the familiar surroundings were safe. As I wandered through the path, I became aware of a presence just beyond my line of sight. I caught glimpses of movement, a shadow flickering between the trees. Each time I turned my head, there was nothing but the gentle sway of the branches and the fading light. Dismissing the feeling as my imagination, I continued my walk, but the sensation lingered, a nagging awareness in the back of my mind. Suddenly, I heard a faint rustle behind me. I paused, straining to listen, heart pounding in my chest. The sound was low, almost like the whisper of fabric against bark. I turned, searching the shadows for any sign of life, but the park remained still. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, their silhouettes casting eerie shapes across the ground. With every step, the feeling of being followed intensified. It was as if the very shadows of the trees were reaching out, brushing against my skin with a cold touch. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something lurked just out of sight. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, drowning out the natural sounds around me. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the park. I fought the urge to run, knowing that panic would only worsen my situation. Yet, the oppressive sensation of being pursued was relentless. Each time I turned, I half expected to see a figure lurking behind the trunks, shrouded in darkness. As I approached a small clearing, the trees opened up, revealing a patch of moonlit grass. I took a moment to collect myself, the cool light calming my racing thoughts. But just as I felt a semblance of relief, a sudden chill coursed through me. I turned sharply, scanning the edges of the clearing, and there it was. A shape, darker than the shadows around it, standing just beyond the trees. A figure, almost human in shape, but too elongated, too distorted to be anything familiar. It blended seamlessly with the darkness, as if crafted from the very shadows that surrounded it. The sight sent ice through my veins. I stood frozen, the instinct to flee battling against the sheer disbelief of what I was witnessing. The figure remained at the edge of the clearing, motionless, yet I could feel an undeniable pull in its direction, a magnetic force that kept my gaze locked on it. The shadows twisted and turned around it, shifting like smoke, making it difficult to comprehend its true form. I took a step back, instinctively retreating from the light, my heart racing anew. In an attempt to steady myself, I turned to run, the path behind me now seeming to stretch into an endless corridor of darkness. The branches clawed at my arms as I pushed past them, desperation fueling my flight. I could hear the whisper of movement behind me, a low sound that sent dread spiraling through my mind. It was as if the shadows had come alive, chasing me deeper into their realm. I emerged onto the familiar trail that led to the park's entrance, my breath coming in short gasps. The night air felt alive with tension, each breath a reminder of the figure that had stalked me through the woods. I dared not look back, fearing that the moment I did, it would be standing right behind me, just out of reach. As I reached the park gates, I could hear the rustle of leaves behind me, a reminder that the shadows lingered, just out of sight. I burst into the open street, relief washing over me as the glow of streetlights surrounded me, casting away the darkness. But the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on my chest, the knowledge that I had been hunted by something I could hardly comprehend. In the following days, the experience haunted my thoughts. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the figure, that the shadows were just shadows. But each time I walked near the park, a shiver would run down my spine. The memory of that night etched in my mind. I began to notice things I had overlooked before, the way the trees seemed to loom closer, the whispers that filled the air as I passed by. Friends remarked on my unease, commenting on my distant demeanor. I brushed off their concerns, but the truth was that I felt a part of me had been changed, marked by the encounter with something unknowable. One night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I returned to the park. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the paths I once found comforting. As I walked, I felt the shadows gather around me, thickening with each step I took. The familiar trails twisted in ways that seemed foreign, leading me deeper into the heart of the woods. A rustle echoed behind me, and instinct kicked in. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. I could sense it again, the presence that had stalked me before lurking just beyond my vision. Panic surged within me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe through the fear. Determined to confront whatever awaited me, I stepped into the clearing once more. The moonlight pooled on the ground, illuminating the space where I had first seen the figure. I stood there, heart pounding, willing myself to face the darkness. I could feel it, the weight of shadows pressing against my skin, coiling around me like a living entity. In that moment, the figure emerged from the trees. Closer this time. It shifted and shimmered, its form twisting like smoke caught in a breeze. I could see its shape clearer than before. Its limbs were impossibly long, fingers elongated, extending into the darkness surrounding it. There was a sense of familiarity, a recognition that sent a jolt through me, as if I were staring into a mirror reflecting a side of myself I had never known. I stood frozen, the urge to flee battling against the pull that kept me rooted to the spot. The figure began to move, not toward me, but around me, circling like a predator assessing its prey. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows flickered, intertwining with the fabric of my being, a connection that was both frightening and mesmerizing. As it moved, I felt a surge of understanding flood through me, a glimpse into its essence, a connection that transcended fear. I realized that this figure, this shadow stalker, was a manifestation of my own fears and doubts, a reminder of the darkness that resided within me. With a deep breath, I embraced the shadow, allowing it to envelop me. The coldness wrapped around my heart, and instead of fleeing, I stood my ground, accepting the weight of what I had encountered. In that moment, the darkness was no longer something to fear, but a part of the intricate tapestry of existence. As dawn approached, the figure began to dissolve into the early light, leaving behind a sense of calm. I stood in the clearing, surrounded by the warmth of the rising sun, the shadows retreating into the trees. I had faced the darkness within me, emerging stronger for it. From that day on, I returned to the woods with a new perspective. The shadows still whispered and danced, but instead of fear, I embraced them, acknowledging the complexity of light and darkness. The stalker had transformed from a harbinger of dread into a guardian of understanding, reminding me that to face one's fears is to find strength in vulnerability. The forest had always been a place of solace for me. I often wandered its winding trails, seeking refuge from the chaos of daily life. The towering trees stretched towards the sky, their branches weaving a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft beams. It was here, surrounded by nature, that I could breathe deeply and let my mind wander freely. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I decided to take a different path. The golden leaves crunched beneath my feet as I ventured deeper into the woods. I had packed a small picnic and was eager to find the perfect spot to sit and enjoy the tranquility. As I walked, the familiar sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves accompanied me. But after some time, an unsettling quiet began to envelop the surroundings. With each step, I could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The sunlight, once vibrant, was now muted, casting long shadows that danced on the ground. I glanced around, noticing the trees stood taller, their trunks thicker, as if they were guarding secrets I was not meant to uncover. Still, I pressed on, driven by the urge to find a quiet place to rest. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It was an idyllic spot, framed by a circle of ancient trees that seemed to embrace the open space. I laid my blanket down, unpacked my food, and took a moment to absorb the beauty around me. The sound of a distant stream bubbled softly in the background, and I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth of the sun on my face. But as I sat there, a flicker of movement caught my attention from the corner of my eye. I turned my head, scanning the edge of the clearing. At first I dismissed it as a deer or some other woodland creature. Yet, the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't any animal. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the foliage. The stranger appeared to be watching me, their presence unsettling. They were dressed in a long coat that blended with the earthy tones of the forest, the fabric tattered and worn. The hood of the coat shrouded their face in shadow, hiding any defining features. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, the initial calmness of my picnic disrupted by the awareness of this unwanted observer. I instinctively reached for my phone, but the signal was non-existent. I glanced back at the figure, but they hadn't moved. It was as if they were a part of the very trees surrounding them. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid, sitting there like an intruder in their territory. Minutes passed, yet the figure remained. A trickle of anxiety wormed its way into my thoughts as I realized I was alone, miles away from the nearest trail and any other hikers. I considered calling out, but an inexplicable urge stopped me. What if they didn't respond? What if they stepped closer instead? I shifted uneasily on my blanket, attempting to shake off the sensation of being cornered. I focused on my picnic, forcing myself to eat, but the food lost its flavor, becoming a dry lump in my throat. Each crunch of a leaf or snap of a twig seemed amplified, echoing in the eerie silence. I glanced back at the stranger, only to find that they had stepped closer to the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, igniting a fight-or-flight response. I made a decision. Gathering my belongings, I stood up, my movements swift and anxious. I kept my eyes locked on the figure, half expecting them to step forward, yet they remained still, a statue in the woods. As I turned to leave, the unease deepened, gnawing at me like a persistent itch. With each step I took away from the clearing, I could feel the weight of their gaze on my back. The path I had taken was unfamiliar now, the trees closing in as I retraced my steps. I half expected to hear the crunch of leaves behind me, the sound of someone following. Every rustle in the underbrush sent my heart racing, but I didn't dare look back. As I navigated through the forest, the sunlight began to wane, casting elongated shadows that seemed to creep towards me. The woods, once a sanctuary, now felt like a maze closing in on itself. I hurried my pace, my mind racing with thoughts of the stranger, wondering if I'd imagined them, or if they had always been there, lurking just beyond my perception. Finally, I broke free from the trees, emerging onto a familiar path leading back to my car. The relief that washed over me was short-lived, as I turned to take one last glance at the woods. The shadows danced at the treetops, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me leave. With a pounding heart, I climbed into my car and locked the doors, my mind still racing. The woods, once a place of solace, had transformed into a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being pursued, the image of the stranger forever etched in my memory. Days passed, yet the experience lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to return to my routine, but the woods haunted me, taunting me with their secrets. I found myself avoiding them, the thought of stepping back into that realm of shadows filling me with dread. I began to notice subtle changes in my surroundings, flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye, the sensation of being watched from a distance. Friends remarked on my unease, but I brushed it off, too afraid to share the truth of what I had encountered. Each time I closed my eyes, the stranger reappeared, their presence weighing heavily in my dreams. They were a phantom, lurking just beyond my reach, a reminder that some encounters leave a mark deeper than skin. Months later, I decided to confront my fears. I returned to the woods, armed with my camera, determined to reclaim my space. The path felt different, shadows stretching further, but I pressed on. I made my way to the clearing, heart racing with every step. As I entered the familiar space, it felt as if time had stood still. The air held a quiet tension, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I set up my camera, hoping to capture the beauty of the place that had once brought me peace. But as I focused on the lens, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Glancing up, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the trees. The stranger emerged, their figure silhouetted against the sunlit backdrop, a silent witness to my return. My heart sank, fear and curiosity colliding within me. The camera trembled in my hands as I fought against the impulse to flee. I stood frozen, caught between the desire to run and the need to understand. The figure took a step forward, their presence weaving into the shadows around them. I could feel the weight of their gaze, an unspoken connection binding us together in that moment. I took a deep breath, the forest alive with sounds I had never noticed before. Whispers of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of wildlife. With my heart pounding, I raised the camera once more, capturing the haunting beauty of the woods and the figure standing within it. As I pressed the shutter, the moment stretched, time suspended in a fragile balance between fear and understanding. The figure shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing the distance between us. In that instant, I realized that the woods were not simply a backdrop to my experience, but a living entity, holding stories and secrets far beyond my comprehension. I stepped back, feeling the connection dissolve as the figure retreated into the shadows. The clearing, once again, fell silent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the fading light. The forest held its mysteries close, and I was just one of many who had wandered through its depths, forever marked by the encounter. Growing up, I was always fascinated by UFOs and the possibility of alien life. I spent countless nights lying in my backyard, staring up at the stars, dreaming of what might be out there. One summer night, I decided to venture out to a secluded part of the woods near my house, far from the city lights, to capture the beauty of the night sky. I set up my little camp, laying out my blanket and preparing my camera to take pictures of the stars. As I lay back, the sky was a vast canvas dotted with countless shimmering lights, a sight that left me in awe. Time passed, and I lost myself in the beauty of the cosmos, completely absorbed in the tranquility of the moment. Suddenly, a low humming noise broke through the stillness, sending a shiver down my spine. I sat up, scanning the dark trees around me, trying to locate the source of the sound. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, mechanical yet strangely melodic. The hairs on my neck stood on end as the sound grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath me. I felt a strange compulsion to look up, and as I did, my breath caught in my throat. A bright light descended from the sky, illuminating the woods in a blinding glow. I squinted against the brilliance, shielding my eyes with my hands. The light pulsated, casting eerie shadows around me, and in an instant, I was filled with an overwhelming sense of urgency. I knew I should run to escape whatever was happening, but my body felt heavy, as though the very ground was holding me in place. Before I could make sense of what was occurring, I was engulfed in the light. It enveloped me like a warm blanket, and in that moment I was lifted off the ground, my feet no longer touching the earth. Panic surged within me, but I was unable to move, as if caught in a strange dream. The sounds of the woods faded, replaced by an otherworldly hum that seemed to resonate within my bones. I was pulled upward, and the world below me shrank into a blur. Trees transformed into mere outlines, and the ground disappeared entirely. In a heartbeat, I was inside a space that defied comprehension. Smooth, metallic surfaces glimmered in the strange light that surrounded me, and the atmosphere hummed with energy. I felt weightless, my senses tingling with an electric charge. There were shapes around me, shadows that darted in and out of my vision. They moved with an uncanny grace, their forms shifting in ways that defied logic. I tried to focus on them, to see their features, but they eluded my gaze, always just out of reach. A profound feeling of isolation washed over me as I realized I was utterly alone in this unfamiliar space, disconnected from everything I had ever known. In an instant, the light intensified, and I was flooded with images, visions of stars, planets, and vast galaxies swirling before me. They invaded my mind, overwhelming my senses with information I couldn't comprehend. Thoughts raced through me, fragments of ideas and emotions that belonged to someone else. Fear, curiosity, longing, they all melded together in a chaotic symphony, leaving me breathless. I tried to resist, to shake off the intrusion, but the sensations grew stronger. I felt myself being pulled deeper into this cosmic web, tangled in threads of thought and experience that didn't belong to me. Just when I thought I might drown in this onslaught of information, I was abruptly cast back into darkness. With a sudden jolt, I found myself lying on the forest floor, the stars twinkling above me as if nothing had happened. The hum was gone, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Confused and disoriented, I sat up, looking around. Everything seemed normal, but I could still feel the echo of that otherworldly experience lingering in my mind. As I stumbled back to my feet, I noticed something odd, a small device lying next to me. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a smooth, metallic object covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. My heart raced as I picked it up, holding it in my palm. I knew I had to leave, to escape the woods that now felt both familiar and alien. Days turned into weeks, but the experience haunted me. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had happened settling heavily on my chest. The visions would return, flickering in the corners of my mind, reminding me of the things I had seen. I felt as if I had been marked, an unwilling participant in a cosmic game that had no rules. Whenever I ventured outside, I would glance at the stars, wondering if they were watching me, waiting for me to return. The whispers began, soft at first, calling my name from the depths of the night. They twisted around me, echoing my thoughts and fears, blurring the line between reality and something far more sinister. I began to notice changes within myself, an increased sensitivity to sounds, a heightened awareness of my surroundings. I could sense things that had previously gone unnoticed. The distant call of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. But alongside this heightened perception came an unsettling feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes were following my every move. Eventually, I stopped sleeping well. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear the low hum that had once filled my mind. It became a constant companion, a reminder that something was out there, waiting. Friends noticed my unease, commenting on how I seemed distant, lost in thought. I brushed it off, but the truth was that I was afraid to let anyone too close. One night, the whispers grew louder, invading my dreams, dragging me back to that moment in the woods. I could feel myself being pulled again, back into that luminous space filled with shadows and uncertainty. I fought against it, desperate to break free, but the force was overwhelming. The visions returned, more vivid than ever, and I could sense the shapes surrounding me, urging me to join them. The next morning, I awoke in a cold sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that my time was running out. I took the device and buried it deep in the woods, hoping to sever whatever connection it held. As I covered it with dirt, I felt a flicker of relief, but the whispers remained, echoing in the back of my mind. Months passed, and I tried to return to my normal life, but the shadows lingered, casting doubt over my every action. I became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding the woods and anything that reminded me of that fateful night. Yet, I could never escape the feeling of being followed, of something lurking just beyond my perception. Late one night, unable to sleep, I ventured to my window and gazed up at the stars. They sparkled like diamonds against the deep blue sky, but there was an unsettling beauty to them now, as if they held secrets I could never grasp. I closed my eyes, hoping to push the memories away, but all I could hear were the whispers, beckoning me back to the darkness. The truth was undeniable. They were still watching, still waiting for the right moment to return. And deep down, I knew that this experience had changed me forever. I live in an old apartment building that used to be a boarding house. Since moving in, I have experienced a strange series of events that made me question my surroundings. The building creaks and groans, a reminder of its age, but for the most part, it seemed like a quiet place. At first, it was just small noises at night, distant shuffling, whispers that faded into the walls. I tried to brush them off, attributing them to the building settling or my imagination running wild after a long day. However, one night, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. Heart racing, I peeked through the peephole, bracing myself for a familiar sight. But there she was, a woman standing just outside my door. She wore a long, tattered dress that seemed to absorb the dim hallway light, and her hair hung in disarray, obscuring her face. The sight sent a chill down my spine, as if time had stopped and the shadows were swallowing the space around her. I held my breath, hoping she would go away. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, but she remained there, unmoving, her presence heavy against the door. I could sense something about her, an unsettling quality that gnawed at the edges of my mind. Just when I thought I might call out, she turned her head slightly, as if she could sense my gaze. The shift felt unnatural, and a shiver coursed through me. Eventually, she walked away, her figure dissolving into the darkness. I waited a moment longer, my pulse pounding in my ears, before I reluctantly opened the door to find the hallway empty. The silence enveloped me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the days that followed, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the apartment. They spoke in a language I couldn't comprehend, a symphony of hushed tones that seemed to wrap around me like a cold embrace. Each night I would hear her footsteps again, softer this time, as if she were pacing outside my door. I began to notice small things. My belongings slightly shifted, the arrangement of items in my room changed when I returned from work. At first I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness, but deep down I knew it was more than that. One evening, after a particularly long day, I returned home exhausted. As I settled into bed, the familiar sounds began again. The whispers resonated, becoming an unsettling chorus that thrummed in my ears. I pulled the covers tight around me, willing myself to sleep, but the rhythm of her footsteps grew louder, as if she were marching to an unheard cadence. Suddenly I felt an unexpected chill sweep through the room. I sat up, the shadows stretching ominously across the walls, and caught a glimpse of her through my window. She stood there staring at me with wide, sunken eyes that seemed to penetrate the darkness. Her smile was twisted, a grin that sent terror coursing through my veins. Panic surged within me as I scrambled for my phone, hands trembling as I dialed 911. I spoke to the operator, but the words caught in my throat. Every time I attempted to explain, her gaze intensified, as though she were weaving an unbreakable bond that silenced my pleas for help. Then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, I made the decision to look away. I focused on the wall, taking deep breaths, trying to quell the rising tide of dread, but the whispers escalated, their urgency mounting as if they were pleading for attention. I could hear them weaving through my thoughts, beckoning me to listen, to succumb. As the night dragged on, the whispers transformed into screams, reverberating through my mind. I pressed my hands against my ears, desperate to block them out, yet their volume surged, filling every corner of my consciousness. I wanted to escape, but the weight of her presence anchored me to the bed. Eventually, I surrendered to the encroaching darkness, slipping into a restless sleep. I awoke the next morning, unsure of how much time had passed. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, but it felt dimmer, the world outside seeming more distant than ever. I tiptoed to the door, my heart racing with the dread of what awaited me beyond. To my surprise, the hallway was empty. The silence felt almost deafening, as if the house was holding its breath. I ventured out, half expecting her to be lurking nearby, but the corridor was silent and still. Days turned into weeks, and while the woman no longer appeared, I could still sense her lingering presence in the corners of my mind. The whispers faded, but never completely disappeared, like a haunting refrain that played in the background of my thoughts. At night, I would lie awake, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching me, a constant reminder that I was never truly alone. Eventually, I decided to seek help, to find answers to the disturbances that plagued my existence. I scoured the internet for anyone who had experienced something similar, searching for a clue that could explain the terror. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to hauntings and supernatural encounters. People spoke of lost souls, entities tethered to the world by unresolved grief or a tragic end. They described similar experiences of being watched, of strange occurrences that seemed to follow them. As I read their stories, I began to piece together the fragments of my own experience, realizing I might have opened a door I could never close. Months passed, and I made the choice to move. The apartment that had once felt like a refuge now became a prison of my own making. The unsettling memories followed me, echoing in the corners of my mind, leaving an indelible mark that wouldn't fade. On my last night in the apartment, I took one last look around, trying to hold on to some semblance of the life I once had there. As I stepped out into the hallway, a cold breeze brushed against my skin, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard her whisper my name one final time. I shut the door behind me, determined to leave it all behind, but deep down I knew I could never fully escape.